you. So, first, I'd like to thank our very special guest today on the podcast for this episode of the Intuitive Revolution in Business. And my guest doesn't know that I've actually reviewed two of his books on the podcast and about to review the third one. So, I'm a bit of a fan of your work, even though I can't pretend that I've read all your books because you've written quite a few, haven't you?
I've been told that this year will be number 50, 50. So I haven't been keeping track, but publishers do. So
Oh,
yeah, I'm
wow.
turning out a big 50 this year.
And do you think you'll be writing more, or what do you?
Well, yes. In fact, this morning I was working on my memoir that I've been working on for the last year or two.
Oh,
And
wow.
I'm about to publish my memoir this year. And also, I don't know if you know this, Anj, but in my spare time, I write mystery novels. And I've published 9 mystery novels, but I have 5 more that I've written that I'm going to be publishing over the next couple of years. So, yeah, I never stop. I decided to create a job I would never want to retire from.
You know what? That's also my dream. So, yeah, I would like to um, earn my living writing books personally, and I love memoirs too. How did you find memoir compared to writing nonfiction books?
Well, one thing is I was more emotionally involved in it because a lot of the stories I tell are stories of things that changed my life. And so I I didn't realize how many times I would be shedding tears myself as I was writing about some particular incident in my life. Not necessarily they were always sad tears. Some of them were tears of elation and joy about different highs I've experienced. But I would say the emotional undertaking was, I hadn't really predicted that that was going to be the case. Mystery novels for me are just pure fun, and nonfiction books, although they are about serious subjects, like The Big Leap and The Genius Zone are about serious subjects, I try to write them in such a way as they're not heavy, that they're
Yeah.
enlivening. So even though it's about something that could be considered heavy, like changing your life. But with the memoir, I felt unfettered to just dive in and tell the stories that tickled me, that I wanted to tell. And so maybe there'll be a 2.0 down the line that has different things in it, more things in it. But for right now, I'm complete with the one that I'm going to publish here this year.
Oh, wonderful. I look forward to that. I've written one memoir personally, and that was about the transition of my dad. And I found it very different, just like what you said, from nonfiction, where it's mostly your intellect that speaks, or fiction, where it's your imagination. I think memoirs really touch deep inside, almost the soul, I would say. And I
I would
really
agree
love
with you.
doing that, but it's much more um, gut wrenching in a way, not necessarily in a negative way, but it goes far deeper into the roots of an author, I feel. So, wow. So I wanted to go back to the first time you published a book when you were a young author, and I don't even know if you thought you could get a publishing deal. What was the first book you published, and what do you love the most about it?
Oh, well, it changed my life big time. Um, I'll tell you exactly how it happened. I had I was just about to finish my PhD at Stanford, but I hadn't yet really decided what I wanted to do, whether I wanted to go in a university direction and teach at a university, or did I want to go into private practice. Some of my friends that were in private practice, they were driving around in Mercedes and Porsches, and some of my friends that had gone the university route were still trying to pay off their student loans, and so there was a lot of attraction to go into private practice, but that wasn't where my interests lie. I wanted to be a communicator. I was the first person actually, listen to this, in 1972, I said to my professors at Stanford, wouldn't it be great if we could put this stuff on public TV? We've got such great information. And I remember they looked at me like I was some kind of crazy radical. But, you know, in a few years, there
Yeah.
were these kind of shows like John Bradshaw was one of the first one, and Leo Buscaglia, the Love Doctor. And pretty soon we're on there. And, you know, it was an amazing thing to watch in my lifetime, because from the very beginning, I wanted to get all this great stuff out into the world instead of keeping it inside the ivory tower. So anyway, what happened was I went over to see a new colleague that I had just met named Jim Fadiman. And I'd heard about him, and that he was into this new thing they called transpersonal psychology, which included a spiritual element in the whole way of viewing human beings. And that was very different from orthodox Stanford psychology at the time.
Absolutely.
And,
Yeah.
and so I went over to talk to Jim Fadiman. He was a design consultant over in the engineering department. But what he really was a kind of a freelance guru and problem solver. And so I went over to his office one day and I said, you know, here's what I'm interested in. And he said, well, if you could write one book right now, what would you write? And I told him, I'd write a book based on volunteering in my daughter's first grade classroom. At Stanford, there was a school on the campus that if your kids went there, they got a great education, and they also had to volunteer to take part in experiments because it was the experimental place. And so if you're a psychologist, you were very used to going over there and doing experimental things. Well, I was doing something a little bit different. I sat in the corner of my daughter's first grade classroom because I was very interested in how I might be able to improve her experience based on what I knew as a counseling psychologist. So it occurred to me two things. One, this teacher spends an incredible amount of time getting kids settled down after going out to recess or after lunch. And I mean, I had a stopwatch on it. And literally, it was later discovered by a larger study that teachers were spending up to an hour and a half a day just getting kids herded around from place to place. And you can find the details about that study. It was done by a man named Eaton Conant, and it's quite a famous study in the educational area. So I came up with an idea. I knew lots of centering activities like relaxation activities and short meditations and things that I used in my practice with people. So I wrote a little book called the Centering Book. And at the time, I was just going to pass it out to teachers in a mimeograph form. So anyway, I went over to see Jim Fadiman, and he said, well, what are you working on? And I said, I'm writing this little book called the Centering Book, which is full of things for teachers to do with kids in classrooms to get them centered quickly. And he said, wow, he said, I could sell that. And I said, what do you mean sell that? And he said, oh, you didn't know I'm a acquisitions person for Prentice Hall Publishing Company back east. Well, I said, I went into immediately a book pitch, and I just, went into pitch mode. I think it was my first pitch. And I said, this book could sell not just thousands to teachers, but hundreds of thousands. And he said, yeah, I get it. And he said, when can you have me a draft? I said, just off the top of my head, I said 3 weeks. I didn't even own a typewriter at the time, by the way. I had to go borrow or rent a typewriter to do my typing stuff on my dissertation and everything. So, and I was literally living on $40 a week as a starving graduate student at the time, very familiar with large jars of peanut butter and top ramen and all the essentials that starving graduate students eat. Well, I made good on my deadline. I borrowed a typewriter and I set it up. And at night, I would just crank like crazy from when I finished classes until midnight or so when I keeled over. And then I'd be up again at 6 o'clock going again. And so I wrote this entire little book, the centering book, in 3 weeks. And it turned out to be a little gem. When I turned it in, the publisher went wild over it, and a couple of cool things happened. They got it as a selection of a teacher's book club. So the first month, lots of attention went out, and one of the big right-wing organizations banned my book, which was the greatest thing that you can ever have to a book. They said it's full of yoga postures and yoga is devil's work or something like that. Anyway, they were just really critical of it. Some group down in Dallas, Texas, I think it was. But they did me the greatest favor, because I always thought when I published other books, I should send them down a preview copy and say, could you please ban this before it's out? Because many times I'd be sitting on the beach in Maui for a vacation thinking, thanks to that organization for the royalties. But anyway, to make a long story short here, I wrote this little book called The Centering Book. And instead of maybe 5,000 copies or 10,000 copies, it sold like 60,000 copies the first month, something like that. And I'd gotten literally an $800 advance from the book. And so right away, as soon as this first month was out, the publisher was on, hey, do you have another book in you? And I said, yeah, I got a ton more stuff like the centering book. And they said, hey, let's call it the second centering book. I said, fine. That one took me about 6 months. So within a year or so, I had this big bunch of books out there in the education domain. And I kept publishing more and more and more. So listen to this. I'm sure you know who Jack Canfield is, Chicken Soup for the Soul. Well, long before Chicken Soup, he wrote a book called 100 Ways to Raise Self-Concept or Self-Esteem in the Classroom. They sent me that book to look at, to ask whether they should publish it or not from Prentice Hall. And so I'd never heard of Jack before, but I was reading through this and I said, wow, this is great stuff. This is exactly what education needs more of, is self-esteem activities and processes. And teaching kids how to communicate and teaching kids how to listen. Those kinds of games were in that book. And so I said, hey, not only should you publish this book, but I guarantee you it's going to be a classic in the education area. And, by this time, I'm about 1 year out of graduate school. And here I am sounding like the expert in what's going on in education. But because I'd sold 60,000 books the first year, I suddenly was the expert. And that was just a gigantic, blessed way to happen. The same thing happened later with our book, Conscious Loving. It came out in around 1990 or 91. And interestingly enough, the month it came out was the same month they started the Persian Gulf War. So we were supposed to be on Oprah and all that was canceled in favor of, war things. So it wasn't until the paperback came out a year later that we ended up getting our Oprah appearances and that kind of thing. So, and it was great in a way because by then the paperback was out and the hardback had done well, but always a paperback is going to sell a lot more. And so, rather than selling 100,000 $15 books, we sold 1 million $7 books. And so it worked out really, really well. So at first we thought we were, kind of thwarted by having the war start the week we were supposed to be out on tour with our book. But it turned out to be a great blessing in disguise, as many things that look like a setback will do.
Did that end up in your memoir or not?
Yes, it's actually, the story is in, and also I got the same gift with my book, Learning to Love Yourself, because that came out. I wrote it the first summer I was with Katie 42 years ago. By the way, we just celebrated our 40th wedding anniversary.
That's wonderful. Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and I almost thought, I'm interviewing you, but really, Katie is a co-author on many of your books.
Yes. Yes, yes, our book, especially Conscious Loving, it leads to a funny story. Before we were going to be on Oprah, the producer called and uh, and said that which one of you is the talker? We want to focus on the one of you that's the main talker. And of course, the reason we wanted to be on the show together was to show equality, because up until then, they'd had almost always single male relationship experts or married male relationships experts. But we wanted to go on and show that our relationship is what it is, And so we said, we are both the talkers. And then he said, no, we're really set up to focus the camera on one person at a time, not on two people at a time. And we said, well, change that so that people can see us interact with each other, not just two talking heads in separate boxes. And so anyway, they did so and set it up a little differently so they could focus in on us as a relationship as well as being the relationship experts.
That's wonderful. I'm so glad this happened. So important. I can see that.
Yeah, I probably wouldn't be sitting here talking to you unless that had happened, because suddenly, suddenly after Oprah, we're instead of selling 10,000 books a month, we're selling 10,000 books an hour. It's really life changing. And other times we were on there was also great, but that first time was kind of like sitting in your car at 0 and then hitting the accelerator and going to 60 in 10 seconds. People often ask me, what's it like being on Oprah? And I said, well, go down to the coffee shop and order 10 shots of espresso and go pop, 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 pop. And then wait about an hour. That's what it's like, a lot of attention and pressure.
I can imagine. I'm curious to see, how did you get to work with CEO and executives from that place of writing all those books? Because one of my favorite books of yours is the Corporate Mystic.
Yes, long before The Big Leap came out, which is widely used in business now, that book, The Corporate Mystic, was a nice little business bestseller for several years. And I can always tell when some program about it has been on, because book sales will pop up in odd places like Bangalore, India. I noticed there was a big wave of people buying The Corporate Mystic in Bangalore, India a while back. Well, here's how that happened, Aj. I had the good fortune of meeting a well-known business consultant named Kate Ludeman. And I met her also in the best possible way because she read one of my books. Actually, the book I just mentioned, Learning to Love Yourself, she read that book and found it very profoundly life-changing. And she was a business consultant and also worked at a electronics firm in Silicon Valley. She was my co-author years later on The Corporate Mystic.
I read the book. Anyway,
she got in touch with me and said, hey, could you do this stuff that's in Learning to Love Yourself with business executives, but maybe not call it Learning to Love Yourself. call it something like Improving Your Leadership Skills. And so she brought me in to a number of corporations and sent her executives to me. And that was how I got into that area, because I had 0 business training. I've never made a budget in my life. And thankfully to my brilliant, awesome wife, Katie, I haven't had to touch a checkbook in 42 years because she actually likes to move the money around. And so I have never been good at those kind of numbers. And so fortunately, she spares me from that. But anyway, who would have predicted that I would have ended up a business consultant later on? But it was working with those executives which gave me the idea for The Big Leap, because The Big Leap is about 2 big things. It's about what I call the upper limit problem, which is what your head keeps bumping against as you go higher and higher. It's the automatic unconscious ceiling you put on yourself based on old limiting beliefs. And so I explored that because all these big executives, these brilliant people I was working with, would do the dumbest things in their personal life. How is it that a person who's got degrees from Harvard and MIT would have an affair with his secretary and think he could keep it secret? You know, those kinds of things that I would get brought in to deal with. So I got to look at the upper limits problem in a way that often involved tens of millions of dollars, high consequences. And so I mapped out that territory in the Big Leap. And I also mapped out the territory of how to get into what I call now the genius zone. That's the title of my new book. The sequel to the Big Leap is the Genius Zone. And what I found was that each of those really high functioning executives almost always had a place of real genius in themselves that they were not using or that they were underutilizing. Some of them sort of knew what it was, but many of them, I would ask them, what do you think your true genius is? I've never thought of it. Interestingly enough, I'd go to a couple of their colleagues with their permission. I'd say, what do you think Edna's genius is? Or what do you think Jim's genius, true genius is? And the other people could rattle it off just like that. But that person couldn't own it fully and couldn't go all the way with it because they hadn't mapped out the territory. So I map out the territory in the Big Leap and show exactly how to get out from under your upper limit problem and stay rooted in your genius zone. That's also where the new book, The Genius Zone, comes in, because I always say the Big Leap is about getting into your genius zone, and the genius zone is about how to stay there 24 hours a day.
Which I think you say you are now doing most of the time, and you've never been happier, right?
You know, it's interesting. I made the decision in the 90s to do everything I could to be living 100% in my genius zone by the end of the century. And I pretty much met my goal by the end of the century. So for the last 20 some years, I've been focusing on how to stay in that genius zone all the time. And that's an art form. It's also a science. That's what I document in the genius zone. But my life now is 100% in my genius zone, and then getting around from place to place or getting 6 hours sleep a night or whatever I do. I'm not necessarily in my genius zone for 6 hours a night. I sleep from 10 to 4, get a lot of my writing done in the early morning hours. But the rest of my life is pretty much spent doing the things I most love to do and doing things that make my biggest contribution to other people, like what you and I are doing right now. I probably spend 300 or 400 hours of my life every year doing interviews and podcasts and radio shows and things like that. And to me, that's a good use of my time, because that's obviously going to affect hundreds, thousands, maybe even millions of other people. So these days, I'm 77 now, and I'm in great health. But I don't like to go to the airport too much anymore, unless I'm going to Maui or someplace I want to go on vacation. So when people call my office to ask me to do speeches and things, the first question they ask is, can he do it virtually? And most of the time these days I can, but I do very few things where I have to fly to New York or anything anymore. Decided to do most of my travel time for going on vacations. Although I live in paradise here. I live in a little town, Ojai, California, which is a little mountain valley town about 10 or 11 miles from the ocean. So if I want to go to the beach, I can just whiz down there even on my bike. And I'm an avid e-biker. I have an electric mountain
Mm-hmm.
bike that I ride all spring and summer long and well into the fall around here until it gets to be rainy season. And so I try to stay in good health, but I don't want to waste any of my precious time here on earth doing anything I don't love to do.
Yeah, it's that's really wise. That's where I am at as well. And
Mm.
I, yeah, I came to it probably in a very different way than you did, but I find my zone of genius is really where I want to live as well. I was going to ask you what is your zone of genius, but I'm aware of the time and that we probably have only 10 to 15 minutes left. And I wanted to kind of gear our conversation towards spirituality and intuition, because that's the thing, and in business, because that's the theme of the podcast. And my next question was, how did you get to talk spirituality with your CEOs and all these big wigs that you got to work with accidentally almost?
Yes, there's a key story that I heard once, which made a big impression on me. I learned to meditate in the early 70s. So I've been a meditator now for 50 years, exactly 50 years this year, I believe. And um, I've done various types of meditation, but the one I'm talking about now, TM, Transcendental Meditation, is the one I learned in the early 70s and have continued to do. So I got into meditation and I heard this story from the teacher, Maharishi, who came to America back in the 50s and was trying to teach meditation, but nobody was paying any attention. And the reason was he felt very blissful inside. And so he said, if you do meditation, you'll feel more bliss in your life. And he couldn't figure out why that wasn't selling in America. And so he went back and kind of retired for a while to his place in India, his cave or whatever, his ashram. And he meditated on this. And he said, oh my gosh, I'm speaking from my state of consciousness. I'm talking about something that nobody has any experience of. So he said, Americans are so stressed out. I'm going to go back again and talk about meditation as something that reduces stress and relieves stress and brings about a state of inner relaxation that will then lead to bliss, possibly. But the first step is to speak into people's existing state of consciousness. So they're not just throwing me out as some kind of kooky bliss person from India, with a robe. And so it turned out to be a genius move because he started talking about it from that point of view. And an interesting thing happened. A graduate student in Herbert Benson's lab at Harvard named Daniel Goleman, who later wrote the book Emotional Intelligence, decided to do meditation and look at its effect on blood pressure. If it indeed reduced stress, it should bring down a high person's blood pressure, hypertension. And so he did that and it worked. And so it gained fame pretty quickly. Doctors were recommending meditation and things like that. So I did my own version of that in the in the business domain. And here's my wife and I call it smuggling donkeys. I don't know if you've ever heard the old story about the border crossing back in the Middle Ages, and some wily person is bringing a camel caravan through just packed with stuff. And the border guard is convinced the old guy is a smuggler, but every Friday he comes there, he searches him, he passes through, comes back again with the next week. And finally, the border guard's going to retire. And he says to the old smuggler, he says, look, I know you've been smuggling something here illegal for the last 20 years. I'm going to retire. I'm not going to bust you. What is it? The old guy says, donkeys. And so he was smuggling donkeys the entire time. So My wife and I used to call me going into a corporation a donkey smuggling operation, because what I did with executives, I didn't really talk about spirituality, because in my opinion, spirituality is something that should be demonstrated and radiated, not theologized about.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that if you have a spiritual life that's working, you know, you're going to look lit up in various ways. You're going to probably have a smile on your face. You're going to look excited about life. You're going to be talking about something you're passionate about. And to me, if a person is looking at me right now and says, that's spiritual, great. That's part of me. That's what I'm trying to communicate. But it's not something I want to talk about all the time, because words kind of cloddy up that area.
Yeah.
So I would talk to executives about getting a little time off from stress, you know, dropping out of, you know, I'd say your job is incredibly stressful and you need a little way now and then of dropping out of that. Meditation is one way. Here, I'll show you a few different things and you can choose which one you want to do. But I want you to take 10 or 15 minutes now and then and just get out of your mind and out of that stress traffic jam up in your mind. And so, you know, talking to them that way, it's certainly easier now because, you know, friends of mine like Jack Kornfield and folks like that have taken Buddhist meditation, mindfulness meditation into tons of companies now. So I'll often have people that come to me that have been meditating for 20 years. And so that's a whole different world now than it was when I was first starting back in the early 80s.
Mm. And do you consider yourself intuitive, Gay?
I do.
Yeah. How does your intuition speak to you?
It speaks to me often in form of images in my mind that have a kind of a special look to them. I can't really describe it too well in words, but I'll give you an example. I had a 10-second intuition that led to a $10 million reward 3 years
Great.
later.
That's actually my next question. Share a story
Yeah.
of intuition in your career that had an incredible impact.
Oh, wow. Yes, in the late 90s, I met a movie producer named Stephen Simon, and he had produced a number of commercial movies like Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure and Somewhere in Time was one of his big ones. And he had just done a movie called What Dreams May Come with Robin Williams. And you might remember that movie from back in the 90s. It was a beautiful movie, won an Academy Award for some of the visual effects in it. But the movie didn't do well at the box office. And Stephen had to start looking around for something different to do. And so he and I started pitching spiritual movies to Hollywood studios. Like we pitched the idea of making a movie of Conversations with God, which they hated. We pitched the idea of making a movie with Richard Bach's book, Illusions, very, very popular spiritual.
Yeah, that was the book that set me up for my
really?
Spiritual path. Yeah.
Yeah, well, we knew Richard very well, and we had the rights to it for a little while. And so, but we couldn't do anything with it because we got thrown out of every meeting in Hollywood we went to. No, studios would say, people aren't interested in spiritual movies, you know. Anyway, so we were determined. So I was meditating, you know, regular TM meditation one morning about 5 a.m., getting ready for my morning writing thing. And at the end of meditation, I had this little flash of a picture. And it was the picture, a little image of kind of like hot wiring around Hollywood, going around Hollywood rather than trying to beat Hollywood into making the kind of movies we wanted to make. And instantly I saw how to do it. I mean, I don't think it took a second to kind of see the whole picture. So my picture was that we would hire scouts to go out to film festivals and find moving, deep spiritual content movies that Hollywood wasn't touching. And we were surprised to find there were quite a few of them. And so my idea was send these scouts out, find the movies, get permission to put them out on DVD for 1 month. Then the filmmaker owns everything else. And we send them out to an exclusive group of subscribers. And I even had the idea, the Spiritual Cinema Circle. And
I looked into
so,
that. I wanted to
yeah,
ask you about it. What a
yeah,
coincidence.
yeah, oh, beautiful. Well, I called Stephen after this little 10-second or tenth of a second flash. And I said, listen to this idea. And I described how we would do it. And he said, oh my God, that's it. And he became the spokesperson for it because I was at that point, it was 2003 or four. I had already sworn off after 1.2 million frequent flyer miles after Oprah. I was really getting tired of traveling. So I said, would you be my poster boy on the wall? Because I don't want to do the PR for this. And he said, absolutely. And so he became the spokesperson for it. And I kind of set up the business operations. Well, interestingly enough, our first month, we got 2,500 subscribers, which just blew the lid off our expectations. I thought if we could get, several hundred or maybe 1,000, but we got 2,500. The next month, we got went up to 3,700, something like that. So within a couple of months, we were into pure profitability, and we were paying our scouts well, which they loved. And what a job it is to go to lots of film festivals and watch spiritual
Yeah.
movies. A lot of people would pay for that job. But we had this wonderful acquisitions person named Anna Dara, still dear friends of ours, that I sold the business in 2008. So I was really in it for about 4 years. And then we sold it to Gaiam, big company that was able to manage it. By the time I sold it, it was kind of driving me crazy because it had gotten too big. It really needed a sincere, trained MBA type business person to run it. And so we got ourselves one of those. And they kept running it. It finally dissolved around 2017 or 18 after, 15 years at least.
That's fascinating, especially since it's the one thing I wanted to ask you about, but you answered it because I asked you about a story of intuition. So I
That's
love it.
intuition for you.
Exactly. Well, I'm not that surprised. I'm not that surprised. How do you think success has changed you? And has it?
Oh gosh, what a question. I don't think anybody's ever asked me that. Let me just tune into that for a second. It's definitely changed me. In my view, mostly for the better. Although I bet you could find people that would say he's a lot harder to get hold of now than he was 10 years ago or 20 years ago.
Well,
I think that's probably true because I'm very zealous of protecting my time to spend the time with my key loved ones. And to me, the highest priority in my life is the flow of loving connection between me and Katie. Everything else keys off of that. So that's where all my attention is always going first and foremost. And, that's working well. We haven't exchanged a harsh word or a criticism this century, so
wow.
it's been well over 20 years since either one of us said a critical word to the other or said something unpleasant to the other. So we learned a lot about that back, during the first 20 years of our relationship. And we actually take our own medicine, what all the things we talk about in Conscious Loving and the Conscious Heart and Conscious Loving Ever After. That's our book for couples at midlife and beyond, Conscious Loving Ever After. All the things we talk about in there, we actually practice ourselves. And so it makes life very simple, and all the principles like open and honest communication, sharing what's ever in your heart, listening carefully to the other person, appreciating the other person, all of those things that's in our books, we actually do those things on a daily basis. And so it makes for a very rich experience from a day-to-day standpoint. My second priority is to live in a state of completion with everybody significant in my life. And by that, I mean significant. Incompletion is when you haven't said something that's in your heart to another person, or you haven't listened to what's in their heart. That's incomplete to me. Or incompletion is when you start a project and then let it go without formally saying, okay, I'm going to drop this. And so a lot of people have these incompletions eating at them all the time. I worked with a man who had been having a secret affair with his secretary every Tuesday for 3 years. And what was the outcome of that? Well, during that time, he had such back pain that he'd had something like 100 massages and 175 chiropractic, treatments. And all his body was screaming at him for living to a double life. And so as soon as he got clear about that, what happened to the back pain? No back pain. That's to me a miracle. And we as human beings need to claim our genius. We need to claim the miracle that lives at the heart of ourselves. There's that wonderful quote I use in The Genius Zone. If you bring forth what is within you, what is within you will save you. It's actually from the Gospel of Thomas 2,000 years ago. But it's true today, isn't it? That if you open up a conversation with your genius, your unique abilities, your life takes on a whole different quality. If your life is about finding what you love to do and finding out what makes your biggest contribution to other people, to me, that's life at its finest. That's the use of your genius. You're using it for yourself and you're using it for other people. That's what we ought to make our lives about. That's what my life is about. And the more everybody's life is about that, I think the happier they'll be.
No, I can only agree with you, and I love that authenticity in what you do, about walking the talk. So my last question that I ask all my guests is, what would you say to someone who's sitting on the fence about using intuition in business?
I would say to that person, our job in business, like I say in the Corporate Mystic and in the Big Leap, our job in business is to make the most of ourselves, to reveal all of who we are. And that's especially your genius, what your unique abilities are, what you most love to do. People can tell if you're doing something you love to do. Also, what is it of yours that makes your biggest contribution to the well-being of people around you? And like my old mentor, Abraham Maslow, used to say, it doesn't matter if your genius is a symphony or making a soup. The two are exactly the same in calling forth that special part of yourself. So whether you're a symphony writer or a soup maker this week, go about it with all of your love into it. And I bet people will say, boy, that's a good tasting soup.
And it's funny you should say that as well, because I believe intuition comes through the heart. So, and that's not a common belief. A lot of people talk about the mind, the third eye, but I think if it comes through the heart, and you're definitely a heart-centered man, then it makes complete sense that you should use your intuition without even knowing that you're using it. And the way you use the word genius for me equals the way I use intuition. It's the same thing. It's that connection to the ultimate core of who you are.
Yeah, and it's a very special thing that can be actually cultivated. Many people may think you're born with it, but you can actually, I know my intuition has gotten a lot better the more I meditate and the more I find a place of stillness inside me. It really seems to come forth a lot more easily and gently.
So I want to thank you, Gay, for all the time that you spent with me and my audience. I'm truly honored. I also am aware of your time and the fact that the room needs to be used by your wife. Um,
Yes.
I maybe will have you again. I don't know. We'll definitely have you soon because I'm going to review the Zone of Genius.
Oh, good.
Um, and yeah, is there anything else that you want to leave our audience with?
I didn't ask you this. What part of the world are you in today?
So I'm in the UK, but I'm actually from Paris. I'm French.
Ah,
And I live in Bristol, which is an hour and a half. It seems like nothing from
yes.
London, but right at the border between England and Wales.
I know it over there. My wife and I did a bicycle touring book of England, Wales, Scotland, and Ireland back in the early 80s. We were avid bicyclists. And so we laid out a great
Oh,
tour. I don't know if the
wow.
book is still available or not, but it was our touring book of the UK.
Wow. So you've been around the UK then. Mm.
Yes. And interestingly enough, I've been so blessed weather wise. There were a couple of times in Scotland where we got rained out and just had to hide in our hotel room for a couple of days, park our bike. But most of the time, we were able to get around just fine.
Well, my one of my local English friends says that the sun always shines on the blessed, no, on the pure of heart. I think that's what she says. So
Oh,
there you
good to
go.
hear.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you for all my audience, and see you again for another episode next week. Bye for now.